Hello, friends. I want to invite you to this next series that's going to begin this Sunday and is going to run for 12 weeks. And it's called Post-Exile Series. It's going to go through the months of April, May, and June. Hopefully sometime along that way we'll be back worshiping together in some way here at the Trinity Sanctuary. And it will go to the first week in July. There is question marks. We have had many question marks. I put one right here because a lot of times when we're going on in our life as normal, we could call that our orientation. And then something happens. For Israel, it was exile in a few different ways and a few different times. Exile would take place. It actually starts all the way back in the garden when Adam and Eve were exiled from the garden, when Cain was exiled from the presence of God. When Abraham was exiled from Ur and from Haran and from Canaan, and when the people of God were exiled in Egypt and in Assyria and in Babylon, in Persia. The experience of exile is actually one of the motifs that's very important in the scriptures. And what comes after the disorientation of exile is important. A lot of us think that we're going to just return to normal. We're going to return to our old orientation. And it's my contention that we will have missed something very, very fruitful and actually exciting if we think that we're just going to return to the old normal. We've been talking a lot in our society about the new normal. And that's exactly what I think we have to prepare for, is from our old orientation to this experience of disorientation to what old philosophers have called the reorientation. What is coming? I don't know for sure, but I thought it would be wonderful to look back at the literature of Israel, the prophets and historical books of Israel as God's people have experienced exile and post-exile, to get ready for our post-exile, for the reorientation that God would be calling us to as the people of God in the season to come. So this is going to be a 12-week series. I have listed out here 12 books that I'm going to focus on. Usually we kind of creep our way through scripture verse by verse, and we take our time as we've been doing in the Gospel of Luke for a couple years now. I want to run through these next books. In fact, I want to cover about 12 or 13 books in 12 weeks. And so I want to look at them from a way up, if you zoom way out on Google Maps. That's what I want to do with these books. I'm going to start chronologically at the end. Malachi is chronologically toward the end of Israel's experience of post-exile, 100 years after they came back to the homeland. And by that time, they'd already wasted their exile. And so I want to start with that, kind of a hindsight. What is it going to be when we look back on this time and go, oh man, I think we wasted this. And so the title is going to be A Good Exile Wasted. Hosea, how God responds with his hesed or his covenantal love, even in the midst of our unfaithfulness. Daniel and Jeremiah, that there's a third way of living in exile. There's a third way of living in what we would call our host culture. And I think there's a wonderful invitation in Daniel and Jeremiah. Ezekiel, a vision for exile. Obadiah, God cares about more than just us. Lamentations, unedited prayer during exile. Ezra, people renewal is as important as campus or city renewal. Esther, for such a time as this. Zechariah, ready for the wild ride. I'll get back to that in just a second. Haggai, living in the shalls and the wills as an anecdote to low morale. Nehemiah, rebuilding values. And then the early church, when exile actually becomes mission. We're going to look at the book of 1 Peter in that last week of this series. I said we're going to get back to Zechariah. In my title, I call it Ready for a Wild Ride, and I get that phrase actually from the Bible Project's video on Zechariah. This resource would be very helpful. In fact, I encourage you every week before we get, for instance, this week we're going to look at Malachi. I would go onto your search engine and search Bible Project Malachi, and you will have a great introduction fact, our excellent introduction to all of these books every time we meet in the next 12 weeks. Join me this week as we look at Malachi, and in the weeks to come as we look at the exilic and post-exilic literature of God's people. And to us, as God prepares us for the reorientation that's coming. Welcome home, even as we stay at home.